Oh, okay. I can see we're live now. Thank you, Harjeet. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Scrutiny Panel 3. It is a scrutiny panel about Agile scrutiny, miscellaneous topics. And this evening's topic is public engagement with council meetings. Hopefully everyone has the agenda in front of them. First of all, apologies for absence and substitutions. Harjeet, can you confirm?
So we've got apologies from Councillor John Ball due to his work commitment. And we've also got apologies from David Harvey, who's a representative of North Greenford Residents Association. But he had a discussion with you, Chair. And,
yeah.
So he highlighted some issues to you.
Yes, I will feed in what David Harvey has fed to me as per the sort of debate we'll have later on. So I'll feed in where appropriate. I've just received a message from Councillor Gareth Shaw. He's running late at work. He'll be with us in the next 20-30 minutes. So apologies for lateness on that front. Thank you. I understand Councillor Steed is in the virtual room as well. Whilst not a substitution, but he's welcome to provide contributions to the debate. Any urgent matters that we need to consider?
No, Chair.
Thank you. Anybody from the panel that I need to know? No? Okay. Matters to be considered in private. I've not been made aware of anything.
There aren't any.
Thank you. Declarations of interest, other than us being councillors being in every council meeting. Any personal interest? No? Thank you. Minutes of the last meeting. Just to double check that the minutes on the agenda, apologies, of the 11th of February, 17 pages. Instead of going page by page, has anybody in the panel have any corrections and matters arising that will not be dealt with today? Let me just... No comment from anybody? I'll accept the minutes for accuracy and for any matters as approved. If anything does come up that is technically fundamentally different, then please do raise it either in the meeting, because things may come up, or after the meeting, although the minutes are approved. But I appreciate this is a new style of scrutiny, so things may arise for addendums. Okay, please bear with me. I've just managed to close my agenda. Okay, the first and main item on today's agenda is the report about the public engagement with council meetings. To put it into context, it's about the engagement and accessibility of the public with meetings held by council, by councillors, which normally would be available for those to attend in person at any council appointed venue. So it would encompass any meeting where councillors would attend in a councillor capacity in a scheduled formal format. So it's not any bespoke meetings that you may have, say, with your local residents, resident associations. This is formally council-led or councillor-led meetings. Okay, we have a few speakers, a few guest witnesses that have volunteered to speak tonight. The first representatives are from Ealing Matters. We have Miss Kay Garmison?
Garmison, yeah.
Garmison and Miss Libby Kemp, but I understand Kay is speaking on behalf of Ealing Matters.
Yeah.
Over to you.
Well, thank you, Chair, for inviting me to address the Scrutiny Review panel this evening on public engagement in Ealing Council's meetings. I'm Kay Garmison, a co-founder of Ealing Matters, which is an alliance of around 70 residents' associations and community groups from across the borough. What I have to say is based on my personal experience, but I'm sure that it's fairly typical. My contact with the council until a few years ago was limited to finding out and/or complaining about council services. I think that that is where most people's contact starts and finishes. In 2017, I got involved with an alliance of residents groups in central Ealing, Save Ealing Centre, which was fighting a development at 9042 the Broadway at the time. Ealing Matters came into being shortly afterwards. Through the work of these groups, I started to attend and then to speak as an objector at planning committee meetings. As I grew more knowledgeable about and critical of development across the borough, I became interested in the local plan, which led to my speaking at the Local Development Plan Advisory Committee last December. My first observation is that members of the public are very much an afterthought in the proceedings of council meetings, or these types of council meetings. These are geared towards councillors and officers who know each other and are very familiar with the procedures. This can be intimidating for residents who may be speaking for the first time and confusing for those watching, also often for the first time. This is particularly so if the chair fails to introduce the participants and their roles and the structure of the meeting adequately. Residents groups have had to fight to achieve this, notably in planning committee meetings, despite it being official good practice. Worse than that, members of the public can also be made to feel personally insulted and belittled. This happened to me when I asked to speak at the December 2020 LDPAC meeting dealing with infrastructure. Councillor Mason had recently resigned his cabinet portfolio, which meant that the timetable for development of the local plan was shot, including delivery of the authority monitoring report, which residents have been asking for since 2016. It seemed the right moment to ask when these would be made available. When else but the last scheduled LDPAC meeting. I was told that my statement was irrelevant to the meeting, so while I was allowed to make it, it remained unminuted. Even as an invited speaker, there can be issues. For instance, I'm aware that the topic I'm speaking about this evening has been on the panel's agenda since November last year. I was contacted about speaking at the end of March, but nothing was confirmed until Tuesday evening this week, by which time I'd forgotten all about it, to be honest. It's a shame, as with more time, my contribution could have been better. Anyway, apart from the issue of being an afterthought, my second observation is that contributions by members of the public are tightly controlled and curtailed in these types of meeting again. For example, however many objections there are to a planning application and however long the planning officer has chosen to speak for, only one member of the public is allowed to speak for a maximum of 3 minutes. This constraint is rigorously exercised despite the chair having the discretion to allow more than one speaker, according to the council's own protocol. If presenting live, members of the public have had to dial in the past and have been unable to run any presentation material themselves. Only recently have we been able to submit video presentations, but not everyone is able to produce these. After the public speaker has made their statement, there's no right of reply and no opportunity to set the record straight if committee members and/or officers misinterpret what they say. Preparing this talk has made me understand in part why the situation is as it is. I reflected that actually council meetings of this type, planning committee meetings, perhaps less so LDPAC, are designed for decision making. They're the culmination of much analysis and preparation by officers and the effort of reading reams of reports by committee members. A 3 or 5 minute speech by a single member of the public is nothing but an irritant and isn't going to change anything. It's too late in the process. The public needs to be involved and have real influence at the formative stages of policy making before attitudes and constraints have hardened. Councillor Mason did attempt to start a dialogue with residents about the local plan, and he's to be congratulated for that. Sadly, with his resignation, this initiative appears to have ended. In conclusion, then, I'd like to make the following recommendations. Firstly, whether members of the public have volunteered to speak or been invited to do so at council meetings, or are simply watching proceedings, explain the meeting and the participants at the outset. Don't assume they know. Secondly, if a question or statement is accepted for a meeting, it should be minuted. Thirdly, ensure that invited speakers are properly briefed in a timely fashion. Fourthly, include the full text presentations of invited speakers as appendices to any reports, and provide feedback ideally separate to those people separate from the final report. And fifthly, consider how to engage members of the public at the formative stages of policy making when they can have most influence. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay. Just for clarity, could you just reiterate your suggested recommendations?
What, read them again?
Yes. So I was making notes and.
Well, I can send you a copy, but yes, by all means. Well, firstly,
for everyone, actually, for the panel and the public.
Yeah. Okay. I think making clear what the meeting is and the participants at the outset. I think it's slightly different with this because you contacted me, and because you know I'm involved in this kind of thing, whereas a speaker who gets up to speak at a general council meeting, it may be the first time they're doing it. They may not know the procedures. I think particularly I'm thinking of planning meetings, which have a particular format, which is not necessarily clear to somebody who's participating.
Okay.
I think to the second point, if a question or statement is accepted for a meeting, I think it should be minuted. Which, as I said, in the LDPAC meeting I attended, it wasn't. Secondly, to ensure that that speakers who are invited to speak are properly briefed in a timely fashion. As I say, I had, because I'd heard nothing, I'd only had a very brief email. I was expecting to be briefed, and then suddenly I got the email on Tuesday and thought, oh, I haven't prepared anything. So I think just a bit more care in that on that front. I think it would be good because what invited speakers present is so brief, relatively speaking. It would be good to have that as a full text, as the appendix to any reports, so that it can be seen what people said. And it would be good for those people to receive feedback on what they've said. It's the same with general consultation, that people's comments tend to go into the void and you never hear back any response. And I think people should hear back. They should hear what, even if something is rejected, if it's not accepted, there should be reasons why, I think. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, consider how to engage members of the public at the formative stages of policy making. As I say, by the time things get to committee stage, there is so much momentum behind them. I know that they can be overturned, decisions can be overturned, but so much work has gone into them that being able to speak for 3 minutes or whatever is not going to change the direction of travel.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, I would like to ask the panel if any panel members have any maybe questions or queries or clarification queries for Kay, or maybe Libby, because Libby's online as well. Please, could you please put your hand up? Okay, Councillor Burke.
Hello.
Sorry, too many means of putting hands up there. So it's a bit of a question, Kay. I don't expect, or Libby, I don't expect you to know the answer to this. So it's a bit of a question and a bit of an observation. But just, I've been a little bit involved of recent days in the design review panels for my ward. And they seem to, the intention of those seems to do exactly what you're talking about. So I suppose the question is, have you been at all invited in your local areas to that? And And I suppose my observation, seeing you shaking your head, is, and perhaps it's an action for us, is to see where they are being set up and actually just really make sure that concerned members of the public know about them, because that's exactly the recommendations that are coming from that, which is about engaging the public early so that they don't feel that the developers get the early engagement and they don't.
Yeah.
Literally the things you've listed off seem to be there. Joanna's part of that and various other people around the table as well. But I think, as I say, if it's okay to give an observation, I think it would be really useful if the public knew when they were being established, because I think they are a real help in terms of, they're in their early days, but they're a real help in terms of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to come back on that, Kay?
Well, I was aware that, I must admit, my impression was that it was a single design review panel, a standing panel, if you like, which would cover the borough. So already there's a misapprehension there, possibly, because, there's been no communication about it, other than amongst the residents groups.
Thank you. Has anybody else from the panel any questions for Ealing Matters? Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, thanks, Kay, for your contribution. That's helpful. I just wanted to clarify your recommendation number 4. I didn't quite follow it. In terms of you make the contribution, then it needs to be attached to some kind of appendix. I don't know how that would work.
It was just to have a record of what people had said in full, because, what have I done? My contribution is 2 pages. So it's just to have the full text, as maybe not inside the report, but as an appendix to say, this is what people said, their actual words. That's all.
Thank you. Does any other panel member have any questions? Oh. Who's that? Oh, Libby.
Yeah, on the design review panels, I had no idea either that we were having, I always thought they were just for the whole of the borough. I knew there was one going on, but nothing in Acton from anybody. And I don't know anybody, I know quite a few people in different parts of Acton, different wards, and nobody that I know has been approached.
Thank you. Okay. If I may check with Harjeet if the next speaker is available. Mr. Janpal Basran from the Southall Community Alliance.
So Janpal Basran has said that he may be a bit late, so something urgent has come up for him.
Okay. Is Miss Chris Hurley online?
Not yet, no.
Okay. I just wanted to fill in because I did speak with David Harvey, who's the chair of the North Greenford Residents Association. To my understanding, has over 1,200 households on its mailing list and issues a monthly magazine to its members. And because David Harvey could not attend this evening, I had a lengthy chat with him, a conversation about how the council improving an engagement with the public. He said that residents associations did not know when full council, for example, meetings or other council meetings were being held. If you knew where to check, you knew on the website, but people forget. Councillors, we know our schedule, but members of the public don't necessarily need to follow it. So it was very much the notification side. Also, to be notified about certain meetings and consultations which are relevant to a particular area or geography or community dependent, whether it's a specific community or a geographical community or a specific interests like a leisure centre or a library in the area, so that local resident associations are informed in the, as Kay has highlighted, in the formative stages of dialogue. He also mentioned, and I've put it in the briefing notes, was he gave an example that he only found out about a council motion about Perivale Golf Course being converted into a Christmas tree forest from an article in the press. And he would like to have found out when a dialogue started at the inception of the idea, and so that they were prepared to present at the full council. So those are sort of the brief notes that David Harvey mentioned to me. I see Councillor Woodruff has got a question.
I just wanted to say, obviously, I suggested him because he covers some of my ward, and yeah, it's certainly a very active residents association. And I think that, I mean, the Christmas tree on the golf course thing never happened, did it? I mean, there are quite a lot of things do start off, and I don't know whether, I can't recall whether the motion ever went to council, but I think sometimes discussions happen which are a bit early, and sometimes mad things get discussed and it never gets anywhere because it gets stopped later on. I don't know if we're getting into a discussion or not. I just wanted to say on the Ealing Matters thing that there are specific rules about planning. Planning, it is different. I know it's not an annoying thing to say, but there are sort of strict rules on planning which are different from other parts of the council. But the planning tends to be the main area that the public are involved in, and that's the one where you get the large meetings. So ironically, the sort of strict controls are on the one area that the public do want to discuss. Now, I don't know how we get out of that, but I think that is the problem. I think on the minute, we've had lots of discussions about what constitute minutes of a meeting, as to whether they are literally recording what everything said or whether they're notes or not. And I don't know, I think Sam might have something to say about that, but I know we've had discussions about that sort of thing.
Thank you, Councillor Woodruff. As the other speakers haven't yet appeared, we'll invite them in once they're online. So, Haji, did you want to say something?
Yes, so I note that that Libby Camp's stating that Chris Hurley sent her notes. So so does that mean that Chris Hurley is given apologies, and whether Libby is going to be speaking on her behalf?
She doesn't know how late she's going to be. That was the problem. So she said if we were running out of time, I'd do, because I'm in Acton as well as her. I'd do I'd go from her notes, which we put together.
Are you able to present her notes at this stage?
I am.
Over to you then.
Right. Okay. So she apologises in case she's not at the meeting on time, but the main point she's going to raise are, firstly, ward forums and how they must continue. However, and there is a big however here, they are supposed to be for the residents, for the electorate, not for the councillors. And we have a problem that we are rarely allowed to put anything on the agenda. And if we are, we're never allowed to use it. And it becomes just something the councillors decide exactly what they want to say, who they're going to invite, and they take over the whole meeting. So examples of that could be, we had a problem with an Airbnb and we were told we couldn't bring that up at a ward forum. It was to do with the residents and the stuff going on the road with it, all sorts, as it was a planning issue. Second time, every ward forum for 3 years, a particular councillor put on the agenda progress on the South Acton estate. Every board meeting she said, oh, it's going very well, such and such a building has started to go, or section 27 has started, or whatever. And every time we asked her questions, could you tell us how many how much social housing is going up, how much private housing is going up in that block? No, I can't. Next meeting, same question. Block number 5 is going up. Please, could you tell us how much social housing will be in that block? How much is private? How much is leasehold? No, I can't. And that went on for 3 years until one meeting, and I didn't go back after that. She said, I'll have to go and ask the developer if I want to know. Well, that is not the way that you treat somebody who is really interested and really concerned. And if you put something on the agenda, then you should have the good grace to actually do the research to know what you're talking about, not just do it as a one-line piece of text. So that was on ward forums. We all feel very, very strongly about it. Around Ealing magazine, it's a waste of time and money and should be scrapped. The savings put together to support better use of the ward forums. Those are views of both Christian and myself, but it's also, we had them for a long time. Again, around Ealing, I did ask whether all the main council meetings could be put on for the next 2 months on one sheet, which would be very easy to do. And I was told, no, there wasn't the room for it. Well, I suggested that the councillors' details could be put on one page. No, that couldn't happen. The councillors wanted 2 pages for their notes. So we get 2 pages of councillors' addresses and email addresses and telephone numbers, which quite honestly is mostly a waste of time as they don't reply to your emails anyway. But that could have been condensed to 1 page, or even the email, the website links given to it. And we could, you know, a list of what's going on where would be really, really useful if we have to continue with it. But quite honestly, around Ealing, nobody likes it. It's a total waste of time. And we call it the puff sheet. It's a puff of PR for the leader, quite honestly. And it just doesn't do it. It just doesn't serve its purpose. It could be really good for people who do not go online. But there again, it's only in English. And the people we need to read it are people who probably don't have English as their first language. So there is a big problem with that. And those were 2 points that Chris wanted to raise.
Thank you, Libby. So Chris via Libby. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. I see Councillor Shaw has joined us. Welcome.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Apologies for lateness, everybody. I've been caught at work unexpectedly.
Okay. Since we don't have any further speakers at this stage, I'd like to go on to a discussion / debate by panel members. Is anybody keen to kick off to discuss? Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, there's a number of valid points raised, but I'm just kind of maybe give back here slightly. On the council meetings, and I'll probably get knocked down for saying this, but I mean, I know that our website is not the greatest local authority website, but I don't know if things can be tweeted once a week at the end of the week, you know, and say, here's the list of the council meetings, you know, or the link to it, if that could be done. I'm not everybody's on Twitter, I know, but it might be a starting point if that can be done, or even on Facebook or something like that.
Social media.
Yeah, social media. The consultations, somewhat ironic because I was just drafting something at work today about how we consult. Yeah, because I think the council would have a page around consultations, and I suspect, like I do elsewhere, you would normally be notifying certainly interested stakeholders that we anticipate we would want a response from. I can't comment on the council departments here because I'm not doing operational, but the housing department I suspect would like to, I don't know, housing associations and interested resident groups about if there was sort of, you know, consult on a housing strategy. So there could be ideas how we might improve that. The ward forums, and Libby's, so I've always had mixed views on ward forums. Based on my experience of East Acton, I'm not sure how representative they are. Just before this meeting, there was a second instalment, the Race Commission was a meeting. It was about young people in relation to criminal justice. And we not really had a lot of young people come to the ward forums. So there is an issue about, representation and engagement there, of how effective they are. And then around dealing, I hear what Libby's saying, but I do suspect during COVID, although my block of flats, I don't actually see a copy, but there was essential information being passed through during the course of the last year. So I think there is certainly a case for publication still to go. I don't want to be down the Eric Pickles road, sorry to bring politics into it, Chair, where he wanted to abolish all communications from councils as he saw it's political. But I think they do have a space in Ealing still. Let's leave it there.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to pick up on what Councillor Taylor, before I go to Councillor Burke, I'm just going to pick up what Councillor Taylor has mentioned. So they're mentioned about information or informing about meetings coming up via social media platforms. So I note that as a possible recommendation. Another recommendation potentially is stakeholders to be informed about consultations. This is, I think, in the same sort of feeling as we had in the previous meeting, where resident associations are informed about planning applications in the area. So very similar sort of theme where stakeholders are informed of any consultations coming up. Is that correct, Councillor Taylor? Is that what you?
Yeah, I mean, I would just slightly move away from planning, but there are other areas, whether it's adult social care or housing particularly. Yeah, I think, I mean, the departments may have a list of who they would expect to go to, and then try and reach out for other methods as well, because obviously we won't have individual members of the public. It won't be that way, but if the council has lists sometimes of resident groups, that might be a good way.
Thank you. And you also mentioned about young people. Now, I haven't picked up any sort of potential recommendation, but I'll leave that thread to be discussed throughout this evening. But I think engaging younger people is important, and the question is how we do it. So I'll leave that thought on the table. Councillor Burke.
Okay, a few responses. Don't want to turn it into bat and ball, but there are a few responses. So I'll pick up ward forums first, because Hitesh has, and I have a certain sympathy with what Hitesh has said about that. We had 3 ward forums a year, very deliberately in 3 different parts of the ward. And being a kind of list type person, I made a list of who attended all of them, because obviously we kept the name so that people could be informed. And the same, there were only 4 people different at each of them. So the same group of people came around the ward. And in fact, I got much, much better engagement by me going to meetings such as residents' associations. So that was a much, much better in my ward. And I don't know how typical that is, rather than me speaking to the same more or less 20 people at 3 different meetings and not getting the people from the part of the ward that we were aiming to engage with. So I think there's pros and cons to ward forums. It's difficult. I am going to say something in councillors' defence. I can only speak for myself, but I'm sure I'm pretty representative. I answer every single email I get, every single email. And I'm sure there are lots of people that do that. So I'm sure there are some that don't because they're busy and all the rest of it. But I do feel I need to put that in as a bit of a defence in terms of Chris, whoever it was who said that. And then just a couple of other points. I think it's a really, really good point about this whole argument about hard copy versus social media. And again, I did engage at a couple of my residents groups that were in different parts of the borough about not using hard copies, and actually got quite a lot of pushback on that. I really don't know where I sit with that one, but I did get quite a lot of pushback in terms of saying, actually, there are still quite a lot of people who do want to see things in print. And so I think, I'm not sure as a council we're at a stage yet to say that we really just have everything in social media. My very last point is, I think a positive one, I think somebody's alluded to it, has been all the virtual stuff. You know, we certainly know in terms of the number of people who've actually virtually tuned into the planning, for example. And I do think it's a real shame that now we're being pushed. And I think, I stand corrected if anybody knows better than me, it's central government that's saying that we can't do this anymore. And, you know, I do think that's a real shame, because I think that's been a good way of actually allowing. So that might be something that we agree as a committee to lobby about, or put something forward about, include a recommendation, because I do think it's a real shame, you know, in terms of people with caring responsibilities, etc., etc., etc.
Thank you, Councillor Burke. I will just come back on what Councillor Burke has mentioned with regards to the last bit in terms of virtual meetings. Just for purposes of this meeting and those listening in and the panel, virtual meetings came about because of the pandemic, part of the Coronavirus Act, and they had a time limit of approximately, I think it was approximately a year or 13 months when that came to force. So it's not as if virtual meetings are stopping, they are just going back to in person.
I think that, sorry, Joanna, I think it does say that. I think it's saying we're not allowed to have them. They won't be of legal status. So they are going to be made to stop.
Yes.
Sorry to contradict you.
No, it's fine. No, this is a debate.
But we are being told to stop them. Yeah, because they won't count.
Basically, standalone virtual meetings and hybrid meetings currently are not going to be sort of legally valid at this stage. I just don't think, just through experience, that I think proof's in the pudding that the last year has sort of proven that councils can do it, whether it's a council of 69 councillors here. For example, I worked with another council and they had 194 councillors in their full council meeting. So I think it varies, depends on how big the council is and how effective it is. And I understand from various, and I'm sure Sam Bailey from Democratic Services may be able to chip in, is a lot of councils around the country have assisted and sent in evidence as part of the call for evidence and consultation being run by the Secretary of State to have virtual meetings. Or potentially have hybrid meetings. Sam, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, happy to just clarify a few things around this. So a lot of it's in my report, but it's a bit of a fast-moving situation, and there's a lot of moving parts around it. And this was going to be sort of part of my presentation later, so I'll do it now, and we'll remove this bit later in my presentation. But so you're right, Chair, in that the ability to hold virtual meetings was legislated for through the Coronavirus Act. It was introduced through a statutory instrument that the Secretary of State drafted up, and like with all the provisions of the Coronavirus Act, there was a sunset clause of the 6th of May. The Secretary of State was lobbied intensely during this period because it was seen as a really positive thing from, you know, very senior people at the LGA, local authorities, professional associations for this to continue. And, you know, he was specifically asked from October last year onwards to, you know, please make this permanent. It's been really positive. And as we got closer and closer to the deadline, the silence and no commitments, and then eventually the answer came on the 25th of March, which there is a link to the letter, which is sort of 7 or 8 weeks before the deadline hits, that there isn't the parliamentary time to put legislation in place to make it permanent, because the government's busy doing other things. And therefore we'll all have to return back to in-person meetings on the 7th of May. However, there is one big point that might affect this. So, you know, even though the Secretary of State has said we'll have to go back on the 7th of May to in-person meetings, well, actually, there's two main things to consider. Firstly, there was a court case yesterday which was brought against the Secretary of State by the Association of Democratic Services Officers, which is the professional association for the profession I'm in, lawyers and local government, which is the sort of the equivalent for lawyers, and Hertfordshire County Council, who were taking the lead as the sort of claimant authority for what's called a declaratory judgment. And what a declaratory judgment is essentially it's a bit of defensive legal work of getting a judge to say something you're going to do is lawful. And what that court case asked the judge to consider was whether virtual meetings are lawful actually under existing legislation that was in place before the coronavirus pandemic. Now, up in sort of from the 25th of March, we thought that would be very likely to be unsuccessful, because it's unlikely a judge would go against what the Secretary of State is basically implying by saying that, you know, they'll be illegal after the 7th of May. Any business that's taken virtually won't be lawful after the 7th of May. But after heavy lobbying, at the 11th hour, the Secretary of State has written in to support the legal action and say actually he supports the principles around virtual meetings, etc. So I think we've got a much better chance of success, and it's likely we will get a judgment one way or the other before the 7th of May. So that there is still hope that we won't have to wait for primary legislation. I must say, I'm a bit disappointed it's taken so long for the Secretary of State to come off the fence on this, just through my own personal view, because it's cost us £50,000 to hold this court case, but actually, this could have been sorted out a bit earlier, is my view. So, I appreciate there's a lot on his plate at the moment with the coronavirus pandemic, but I think this would have been a great help to councils. The other thing as well that I'll mention, and you have mentioned yourself, Chair, is that whilst the Secretary of State has said that we'll have to go back to in-person meetings for the 7th of May, there's also been launched a call for evidence on how helpful the virtual meetings have been over the last year. So whilst they're saying that if the legal action fails, we're back to in-person meetings the 7th of May onwards. It's not been ruled out that legislation will be made to allow for virtual meetings going forwards. They just want a strong evidence base to do that. Now, I would argue that the evidence base has already been gathered through the lobbying that's carried out, and all the evidence being brought together by ADSO and LLG for this court case, but again, I can understand why they want to do it in an official capacity and go through the sort of the process you'd go through to pass this kind of legislation. So that's the kind of journey we've been on in terms of the legalities of this, and while we're waiting to see what happens after the 7th of May, I'm busily preparing for a return to in-person meetings under social distancing and all the precautions need to take place for the annual meeting on the 18th of May.
Thank you, Sam. Councillor Woodruff, is this about virtual meetings? No.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
I'm just, I didn't know anything about all that. I'm amazed by all that. And I certainly think a year ago, last March, I would have been one of those people who was quite opposed to virtual meetings. I think in a year when we've done it, I have been converted the other way, because I think they have worked really well. And we managed to get, it has been a way of getting more people involved, and I personally think that's the way. I think it would be a mistake to get rid of them altogether. There were one or two other things I wanted to say. One is, you should always respond to emails from your own constituents anyway. I think that but so certainly if you're not responding to emails, and I mean, if I had a big planning thing in my ward, it was not a problem to go and find it on the website and forward the original planning application, planning documents to the constituents, so that to stop people having to ask all the time. I think that that's not a difficult thing. I first became a councillor in 1994. From then until now, I've had so many discussions around Ealing as to whether it's worthwhile or not, and there have been many attempts to scrap it. But it is one. It's just, and yeah, I mean, people always say it's not a propaganda thing, but it is only a way of getting information out to people, which I think is quite difficult. We did actually scrap the councillors' contacts bit for a while, and there was a bit of I seem to remember a bit of a round. It was persuaded to bring it back, but I mean, we know most people don't see the Gazette anymore. I mean, I get the Gazette because my newsagent pops into Tesco's in Greenford, picks some up and brings them down, and so I think although Gazette still operates, nobody reads it, and I think we're seriously lacking a decent local newspaper. I think the website has improved a lot. I think you can find most things on it, but I think when you get into it original, the very first page looks a bit boring. It would be useful to have some contents of saying, look here for this, that, and the other. I'm not sure that that's all clear. So I think those are the things. But I think I'm more interested about this meeting, about hearing people's views about how we can. I think we do need more public engagement, and how we actually do that is problematical with as I say, planning has to be slightly separate because there's separate rules.
Yes.
But I do think we need to hear of realistic ways that we can improve public engagement. I think that's important.
Thank you, Councillor Woodruff. Before I go to Councillor Steed, I just want to highlight for in the report in point 1.16 about viewing figures for recorded meetings on YouTube. Anybody can go on YouTube and check on previous council meetings in the last 12 months. However, there are some statistics here. For example, the recent planning meetings in the last few months, which I have to say, let's put it, and I think everyone will agree, they're quite controversial, high profile applications. Whilst I'm not going to sort of get into the planning aspect of it, the report should read views rather than viewers. But you can see that one meeting, for example, had nearly 2,000 views. Now, I appreciate they're not 2,000 people viewing it, but it just shows the volume of people who have been interested is quite high. And you'll never get even half of that into the council chamber to listen to such a meeting. And also Sam Bailey, the head of Democratic Services, put into the report the pluses and minuses, the benefits and disbenefits of virtual meetings. So I would like the panel to discuss the pluses and minuses of virtual meetings. Councillor Steed, are you going to talk about virtual meetings?
I can do, Councillor.
No, so I'm trying to keep the subject.
No, fine. No, I very much echo the comments from Councillor Woodruff that we need to do a lot more in public engagement. How we get there, it is a difficult one, and we all know that, be it full council meetings or ward forums, unless there is something really controversial, it is the same old people who tend to turn up to those kind of meetings. Sticking to the brief, so to speak, Councillor, on the virtual meetings, again, like Councillor Woodruff, I was very sceptical about how they would work. And some of the initial meetings, quite frankly, didn't work that well. I think we all experienced some of those. Some of the planning ones that I viewed were to put it mildly, not terribly encouraging. But in the defence, I mean, clearly there is a reach that they achieve that wouldn't otherwise be achieved. The only thing I would say, and this isn't to sound too sort of pompous, when we actually do have regular meetings, it was quite a useful way of just making contact with fellow councillors, exchanging bits of information that the virtual meetings don't really allow you to do. So yeah, virtual meetings are, I think, the way to go. We all just save so much time having a virtual meeting than going in for a physical meeting in the town hall. But having said that, there is still some value in actually meeting up with our fellow councillors just to exchange bits of information, pick up on stuff that wouldn't otherwise exist.
Thank you.
I appreciate that doesn't involve the public, but there is a role for councillors to exchange information as well.
Thank you. I just want to highlight a couple of points for the public who because between sort of virtual meetings, we also discuss things on our inside chat. For example, Sam Bailey had mentioned, just to highlight, that the planning meeting from the 10th of March at the peak had 148 live viewers. And that is in comparative to how many people would have turned up, or actually how many people would have fit into a council chamber if they wish to have turned up at the meeting. So 148 is quite a decent amount of people. And also, Councillor Taylor just highlighted here that there are currently 4 people watching this meeting as I am speaking on YouTube. And those who have done scrutiny in the past, other than invited speakers, have we ever had four people turn up at our scrutiny?
I think we ought to congratulate them.
But hopefully, once if the recommendations from this meeting are going to be productive, hopefully moving forward, it will engage more people to watch these meetings and see what's going on the council side, and also what decisions are made, and hopefully partake in them in the future. So, are those old hands? Apologies, Councillor Woodruff, Steed and Burke, are those old hands? Okay, they're old hands. Okay.
Sorry, I do just want to say something else about the virtual meetings, if
Burke.
that's all right. Yeah. No, I do feel quite strongly that we should keep them going. I think that I work in healthcare, and I actually think I'll go as far as say it's irresponsible in terms of both the councillors and the public, because we'll still have to have social distancing. So you absolutely would have to limit numbers. It absolutely will restrict people if we don't give them the opportunity to have virtual meetings for at very least the next little while. And I think, as everyone has said, they've been, really good about people seeing how councils work. And one would hope in the medium and longer term that, they would raise the quality of debate, because you've got a big audience that actually does inspire you, one would hope, to actually really, not that you don't think about it, but, to really be thinking about the nature of the debate.
Thank you. Councillor Nagpal.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to talk a bit about my experience, Chair. So I had a baby on Christmas Day, and ordinarily I would be on, thank you, ordinarily I'd be on maternity leave right now. And it's because I've been able to attend meetings virtually that I've been able to just carry on as normal. And I've been able to attend meetings. I've been able to continue chairing the General Purposes Committee. And since Christmas till now, the General Purposes Committee has taken some really important decisions. And, I'm sure the Vice Chair could have taken the meetings, but it meant she didn't have to, and I could just carry on as I was before. So it's been brilliant. I do, you said that you wanted to hear what we thought about the pros and cons that were mentioned in the report. Well, just one of them that I do want to pick up on, which is that, as councillors, we might be, virtual meetings might detach us from the communities that we serve. Well, I don't think that they would, because during this time, I've continued to do my surgeries, and I'm sure that others have as well. And during that time when you have your surgery, that 1 hour, you make yourself available. You're always there sitting by your phone waiting for it to ring. And if residents have issues, I've offered to, go on a Zoom call with a resident and talk face to face on Zoom and discuss whatever issues they're experiencing. And lastly, I want to make a point about what you've just said with the thousands of people that we've had viewing online. Certainly with those planning committee meetings that were mentioned in the report. The council chamber only allows 40 people, I think. So like online, we've had thousands of people attending meetings. And, again, it means that members of the public can engage who, those members who wouldn't normally travel to the town hall. So if you have childcare responsibilities, or you're a carer, for example, you can't always travel to the town hall and sit there and be part of, engage in those meetings. Whereas now we've had people who can engage and they've been able to just engage from home. So it means that we can have more people engaging. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I just wanted to reiterate, whilst the sort of a couple of thousand views, that also allows views to be watched, the video to be watched after the meeting, for those who want to, for example, check on any detail, or the famous sort of rewind and play again, catch up to check on any detail, especially on certain meetings which are quite maybe technical in nature, where people would like to, for example, I asked Kay from Ealing Matters earlier to repeat certain points, because whilst listening live, I couldn't necessarily rewind. But for the minutes purposes, it's always handy to have it recorded for the purposes of the sort of the technical detail. So, Councillor Rooney.
Thank you, Chair. And I was actually going to make the same points as Councillor Nagpal. So I came back from maternity leave last March. So I think I went to one overview and scrutiny meeting, and then after that it was all moved to virtual meetings. And I found that over the past year, because at first I was a bit worried about whether I was going to have to kind of maybe come off one or two committees just because of childcare responsibilities, but I've actually been able to stay on 5 committees because it's just made it it's just so much easier, because you're in the house, and then you can put your child to bed and then just log on. So I do feel that that's been incredibly useful for me. And also, as Councillor Nagpal said, members of the public who might not be able to travel down to the town hall because of caring responsibilities, then they're able to just log on to the meeting and attend those meetings virtually. So I think it definitely has had some positive points over the past year. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Shaw.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just reiterating what other members of the panel have said, I think actually, the whole online issue has been a positive thing, and I think it is a positive thing and something that needs to be embraced going forward. That it's allowing access for people who otherwise might not travel to the town hall to watch a meeting and so on. Is, as you rightly said, the minutes, you can actually check a video and rewind and see what was actually said, if you want it verbatim, type thing. It's enabling councillors and possibly councillors who aren't yet councillors might consider becoming councillors now, because they could see and think, actually, I haven't done it previously because of commitments, whether it's for childcare or caring for others or relatives who whatever it is. And the key is, I think, really it's flexibility within the system. That there isn't a catch-all, there isn't a great, oh yes, one thing will suit everybody. And I think having the flexibility, though, is key, and being able to manage, some online meetings and virtual meetings if that's what's needed, and some in-person meetings. I mean, I thought a very good point was made by Councillor Burke actually earlier, just about sort of restarting in-person meetings, that actually, scrutiny meetings especially can be quite busy and quite technical, that, we'll often have sort of 6 or 8 officers turn up, for example, to, providing us with information. Often it outnumbers the members of public who are actually going to attend the meeting. And so when we're all back in that room and social distancing's needed, actually, do we have the rooms available? Are the rooms capable of hosting it safely? And these are things that we do need to consider. I think the world's a lot more conscious now. Even, sort of last week I had a touch of man flu. You know, I actually did a COVID test because I did have a cough, but it was negative. So that was good. Yeah. However, you know, I think what it did show was just how conscious we are. You know, would I have gone into a council meeting, into an office with others, and sat there with this sort of cold flu bug? And no, because the risk of spreading that to others, you know, I was very conscious of, and I think people are and will be very conscious of this in the future going forwards. So we need to think about how we will work and make sure that, you know, we take advantage of all the good points that are listed in the pros and cons in the report. You know, there's lots of pros there, so we need to maximise it.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Councillor Mann waved her physical hand on the screen. Councillor Mann, you're muted. Councillor Mann, you're muted. Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah, I'm agree with Linda and Nagpal and Gareth that virtual meeting is very useful because if you are not feeling well, still you can attend the meeting. Yeah, and you can save your travel money, you can save your travel time, and people who got little children, they can manage as well. Otherwise, they have to leave them with somebody and then go to attend the meeting. I think that's very useful. That should be continued. And the other point is regarding the public engagement. I think there should be more residents associations, and they can get together there and they can raise their matters, they raise their concerns, and the chair or the other who are the managing that, they should bring the matters to the council, and in that way they can engage quite a lot, because all people, they can't attend the meeting, they can't go on the YouTube, but if they got quite a lot of residents associations, they can bring that matter there, then their chair or the manager or whatever, they can bring the matter to the council. So this is my point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mann. Was it Councillor Taylor wanted to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, there have been benefits to the virtual environment. I mean, Councillor Mann's just mentioned something in terms of travel. I mean, I work on the other side of London, you know, an hour and a half away. So it saved me, well, only because I've been forced to work from home as well, but it saves me a lot of travel in that sense to come to the meeting. And I think certainly as far as council meetings are concerned, it's sort of brought a level of maybe civility to those meetings. As councils, we've had experience of the kind of atmosphere that's existed in a council chamber for those meetings. I also have sympathy with Councillor Steed's point about informal networking. I mean, he's one of my constituents, and I see him walking his dog occasionally across the road, you know, but that's about the only time I'll be able to network with him. But there is something about just catching up with councillors, and even sometimes the opposition, not because for political reasons, but because there might be a local issue you might have to talk about sometimes. And the virtual meetings, it's not just the council, it's had advantages in all areas. You know, I've chaired quite a number of meetings, political meetings, COVID meetings as well, and that's, you know, brought an audience in where obviously COVID didn't exist before last year, but trying to get people to a public meeting would have been difficult because you've got to find a venue, and depending on the time, you know, cold February night would have been difficult to get people there. And you know, and I mentioned earlier the race commission meeting that's taking place, that's currently in vogue, and the meeting that started just before this one. You know, people have been watching that. They would not have come to the town hall for that meeting because they would have perhaps known about it. However, having said all that, there is something about being slightly old-fashioned here. We are politicians, and maybe I missed the drama of being, you know, of being confronted by demonstrations on the steps of the town hall, you know, in the theatre of it, because you know, less matter it, you get that, but you can't really shout an opposition councillor down a video camera, you know. So, so there's something about that, and you know, I think Jackie Weaver's council managed to grievous drama, but I don't think we're there at the moment. But so there is some merits in having some actual meetings, physical ones still, I think.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I have to say I agree. Part of, especially full council or maybe certain subjects like planning or even scrutiny, if there's a controversial or emotional subject, you don't necessarily feel the support or the objection from residents who have made the effort to come and either support or protest or both sides, as we have seen in the past. So yes, I totally get that virtual meetings have, while they've been a godsend in many guises, as has been mentioned by many on the panel, and just for transparency, Libby Kemp from Meeting Matters mentioned that online meetings are particularly good for those with physical and other impairments. So it's reached people who may have not naturally maybe turned up at a council meeting. One of the questions I would like to pose to the panel, more about a straw poll, is to understand, we can all see the positives of virtual meetings, and I don't think people are against it in principle. The question is, does the panel support or not support, for certain types of meeting, hybrid meetings? The question is whether we would, for example, accept hybrid meetings for, say, scrutiny panels, or certain maybe Ealing Schools Forum, for example, where the Ealing Schools Forum meeting where I've been to before, where teachers and head teachers, for example, trade union members come from all over the borough, who they have come all the way to the town hall to have this meeting after a long day's work, for example. So the question to the panel is, I'm trying to also separate full council meeting and planning meetings. But generally, other council meetings, how do people feel about hybrid formats? Councillor Shaw, is that an old hand?
No, yes, I am responding to your question.
Thank you,
Chair.
Councillor Shaw.
I think it's a good question to pose. You know, and it does come back to the flexibility that I just talked about how meetings are managed and run in the future. That, you know, I think that there could be a role for hybrid meetings. What I don't know is about the technological support and the logistics of it. That, you know, this is the detail that I think council officers, you know, the IT department and Sam and his team in democratic services really need to look at. That, you know, would it be possible to run them? Is it practical to be able to run them as hybrid meetings? But certainly, you know, I think it would be terrific, as you mentioned, that, you know, there could be a scrutiny panel with, you know, perhaps 3 or 4 people present physically, and others who can't make it, you know, joining virtually. And if we could manage that, you know, then I think that would be very good. But what I don't know is the practical detail of it, and whether it would be possible, or whether the logistics could just get a bit too complex. So then it's a case of whether, you know, you sort of mix meetings, that perhaps there are 3 scrutiny panels meetings that are virtual and 3 that are physical, for example, just off the top of my head, you know, and whether it's more practical to run it that way. But, you know, it's definitely something that I think we should look at as a council, and ask officers to investigate and come back and let us know what they think can work.
Thank you. Before I revert to others, just for technological query, having personally worked in Parliament, I've seen how the hybrid works in Parliament, where because of social distancing, not everybody can be in the chamber at the same time, and where hybrid meetings were the way forward. So I'd like to revert to Sam, if you have any comment with regards to hybrid meetings, in theory.
Yeah, so until we've had a judgment on the regulations, currently, following the 7th of May, a hybrid meeting in the sort of pure sense of the word of the phrase, where members are participating in the meeting virtually, while there are a sort of other members participating in person in a location, and those members joining virtually are voting and contributing. They would not be lawful. Until regulations are made to specifically make that so. So just to be clear, that that's not an option on the table unless we have some clarification that either through successful legal proceedings or the Secretary of State legislating for it. So, and I think you've made that clear, Chair, anyway. But I thought I'd just clarify that for the meeting. In terms of the technological side of things, yeah, it's possible. As you said, Chair, it's something that they've done in Parliament. There's just two limitations we got here. Firstly, we're a little bit behind compared to other boroughs in the first place. A lot of other boroughs webcast their meetings, and that's not something we at the moment have capacity to do, although I'm working on it for meetings from the 7th of May. It shouldn't be too difficult to get a rudimentary webcasting system up and running, and I've got I've got some plans afoot to ensure that happens. The advantage to already having a webcasting system is you essentially can build on that infrastructure you have in place to turn it into a hybrid system where you're able to take contributions from people remotely in a meeting room. The thing that makes things a little bit more complicated in a hybrid system compared to a purely physical meeting, even if it's webcast or a purely virtual meeting, is that you've got to consider several different aspects. You've got to consider what those sitting around the committee table can see, to make sure they can see everyone's contributions, whether they're virtual or in person. You've got the public gallery there, whether they can see all that as well in the physical location the meeting's taking place. You've also got to then make sure that those participating in the meeting as meeting participants, either officers presenting or members of the public speaking or members, are able to get a flavour of what's going on in the rest of the meeting as well, so they can follow what's going on. And then you've also, on top of that, got to ensure that those who are in the sort of virtual public gallery, let's say, are able to get a full sense of the meeting. So it's a bit of a production. There's a lot of things to juggle to make it work properly, a lot of different stakeholders to make sure it works properly. So that's why it's a bit more complicated. It's a bit like a TV production rather than a sort of meeting. Now, in terms of the sort of technological side of it, as I mentioned, the other boroughs who've got webcasting solutions are also in a situation where they've probably got a meeting place that they are going to be moving out of in the next few months, which is where we're at with the Chamber and Ealing Town Hall as well. So we've got quite a few limiting factors and again, quite a few moving parts on this that we've got to try and kind of sort out. That being said, I think once we've got a webcasting solution sorted, it won't be long before we can sort of test the possibility of having hybrid meetings. Some other boroughs have sort of talked about what's called I think what we've called a soft hybrid solution. I know a borough I used to work for, Lambeth, are considering allowing contributions from officers at committees through their sort of hybrid system that they've got in place in their chamber. So they'll have their physical meeting in a location. The members will all be present there, will be voting, and the decision will be taken there. But officers will be able to dial into the meeting to present and so forth for members of the public. So, there are, providing all the members are present in a room and are taking the vote, and making the decision. There are options depending on how comfortable we are as an authority with allowing that around a sort of what's called a sort of soft hybrid option. Others are exploring whether you can allow members to contribute from home but not be part of the quorum and not be of the meeting or not be voting, voting member having full voting rights. I don't think we're necessarily comfortable with that in Ealing, but others are exploring that. I haven't had anyone confirm they're actually going to do it, but there's been talk of it in other boroughs. So I think the the main thing is at the moment is I'm focusing on making sure that we can webcast whatever we do live, and then the next step is to look into the capability for the hybrid meetings, because I know that there will be a sort of clamour for that as soon as we're able to do it, and I don't think it will be long before we will be able to do it, you know, through whatever means, legally, through however we manage to get those regulations passed through legal challenge or through them being made in Parliament.
Thank you. Before I go to Councillor Burke, I just want to ask a question just on what Sam just said, because we have discussed a lot about virtual meetings and actually in the process of being live. What hasn't been mentioned, it's been sort of touched upon, it hasn't been mentioned, is the storage of such meetings. Is okay, we talk about virtual meetings that people can tune in when they're broadcast. The question is, do we want these meetings, and are there any limitations on the council side to storing these meetings for some period afterwards? Sam, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, as we've we've had to think on our feet with these meetings. They're very much a product of COVID. We haven't actually, you know, normally what we do in this sort of situation is it would have a sort of great big project plan, and we'd have all the different parts considered and all the stakeholders consulted with, and all of our policies and procedures in place before we begin. But you know, as we were, this was a bit of a creature of the crisis, and we had to just get on with it so that council business could continue. I mean, we were allowed last year, 4th of April was when the regulations were passed to allow virtual meetings, and we had our first virtual meeting on the 15th of April. So, you know, 11 days later, we were straight in there. We were at the forefront. You know, the benefit to that is we were able to test things and make improvements as we went along. You know, the drawback is some of these sort of procedures in the background haven't had a great deal of thought, because we've had to sort of react to the situation. So what I'm saying here is we don't have a retention period at the moment, you know, it's certainly something we should consider. There aren't any limits to storage, so to speak, because for most of the meetings, because the particularly ones like this on Zoom, they're all broadcast via YouTube. YouTube doesn't have any limits on how much storage we can leave on there, although we do have the you know, the option to delete videos when we want as well. It's not like we're locked into having them on there forever. So really, it's a matter of where the comfort zone is with the council, whether we want to you know, keep them forever as a public record. I know one authority used to work at who they were sort of one of the first people first authorities of webcast, and they were webcasting from 2003. They took a very, and you know, their leader was an archivist in a previous career, and they were very keen to keep all of the meetings forever in perpetuity. I think that's a bit over the top, and I think that's you know, it kind of leads to problems, particularly with data protection and things, if you don't have a retention period. So I would be more comfortable with a retention period rather than keeping things in perpetuity, because that's the purpose of the minutes. So you know, happy to hear what members have to say about that, and you know, take that into account when we're working up any kind of retention periods policies going forward.
Thank you, Sam. Points to ponder there. Councillor Burke.
Notwithstanding the issues about the technology that Sam and team would have to sort out, I think a couple of things. One, like you, Joanna, other areas I've worked in, like universities, have been doing hybrid meetings for years for exams, etc., etc., etc. So I think we are well behind the curve anyway. And my second view on this is that it's very, very clear that, you know, businesses and other organisations are going in this direction. So I think as soon as the legislation allows it, if we're not doing it, my hunch would be it wouldn't be very long before we would be facing a discrimination case, because people would quite rightly say, well, why, you know, in particular roles or with particular responsibilities, why can I not do it in this environment when I can working for another organisation? So I do believe that as soon as we can, we should.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Shaw.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just thinking of what Sam was saying there, particularly just in practical terms of meetings. And of course, I do understand the legality of councillors having to be present and so on, and that, you know, I mean, I wouldn't like to take it that given the Secretary of State's now support for the court case being brought against him, you know, the legislation will move on, and that in sometime in the near future, it'll become legal for councillors to meet virtually. But in practical terms, again, you know, we've got 69 councillors in Ealing, and if we are all to meet physically and there is to be some social distancing, actually it's quite difficult to get rooms that size.
We need a football field or cricket ground.
Yes, yeah, well, I mean, you know, we need parks, so whether it's Walpole Park or Ealing Common, for you, Chair, whether we're meeting outside.
Or a beer tent.
Yeah, these are things to consider. That actually, you know, the council chamber is big and serves a purpose, but actually put in some social distancing for 69 people there, and actually it'll be much too small. So, you know, these are the sorts of practicalities that you know, we really need to consider, and which is why the legislation really needs to consider it strongly. You know, whether it's the court case and the government, you know, need to consider how we will return.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Councillor Taylor, physical hand.
Sorry, I just get it in time. I think while Councillor Shaw was speaking, I did wonder, because our demographics in London don't conform to the traditional stereotype of councillors. You know, that stereotype is white, old, retired men is the statistics that often show up. And in demographics in Ealing and London, you know, we've got a different variety of backgrounds, working mothers, you know, some of us who've got work as well. So we're not always there online, you know, that makes it so easy for us to do. So, so yeah, but on the chamber one, even if there are 69 councillors, I don't know, that's probably a job for the whips to somehow, some kind of equity at some point. We'll all have to, one in every 2 or 3 meetings, we'll have to go in, you know, as a kind of rota almost, possibly. Anyway.
Thank you. Councillor Burke, is that an old hand? Okay. I just wanted to...
I thought Sam had his hand up, actually.
Sorry? Oh, sorry. Sorry, I looked down for a second there. Sam?
I just wanted to get back to the point on social distancing and going back into in-person meetings, Chair. Just one thing to remember, councillors, is that on the 21st of June, if everything goes to plan, the government are planning to lift all the social distancing guidelines. Now, I don't know what that will mean corporately for the council. I'm sure they have their own view about what to keep in place and what to remove. But in theory, at least, if all the tests are met and if the government continue with the timetable, there won't be a requirement for that, you know, 1 metre plus mitigations or 2 metres if you can, social distancing in venues. So, you know, we're probably only talking, you know, optimistically, we're talking a couple of months, we're going to have to do things a bit differently in terms of meetings. And then the other thing to remember as well is that the council chamber is not the only place we can meet. We can meet anywhere in the borough, and we have other venues that are larger than the council chamber, and better suited for a larger spaced out social distance meeting. And we do have at least one venue that would be able to fit all councillors in if we wanted to go back to an in-person full council meeting on the 18th of May, which is the Victoria Hall. So, you know, I'm leaving the discussion around the arrangements for this with the whips and with the Constitution Review Group, because they're the sort of bodies that are, you know, putting some thoughts to this. So I can't really go into detail about the different options that are being considered, but I just wanted to put a few things out there for food for thought, because, you know, I don't want us to get down rabbit holes of thinking in certain ways, because there's a lot we can do. We've got a lot of options. And we are lucky in Ealing with the sort of venues we do have available to us.
Thank you, Sam. I wanted to just to reiterate opinion from the panel, because I would like to, as a scrutiny panel and the subject, I would like to maybe recommend that we write to the Secretary of State and put our case forward in terms of having not just in-person meetings, but other format of meetings. I would like to send whatever we decide this evening to forward to the Secretary of State for his consideration. But I wanted to get a majority view of whether we want full in-person, full virtual, or hybrid meetings, or as Sam highlighted, the soft hybrid, where non-panel members or non-elected members are virtual. What do the panel think? Can we have sort of short sort of contributions? What is the gut feel of how this council should go forward on that particular subject?
I'll go first if you like. I think that we should give the option of hybrid or attending in person or to all meetings. I can't, except for something that's deeply ceremonial. And certainly we should give the option of hybrid virtual attendance to the public. But I think for councillors, it might massively increase the number of people who were willing and wanted to be councillors, and increase the diversity of the kind of people that we could attract.
So the accessibility of partaking in the meeting. Can I also, on what Councillor Burke just said, highlight, because I am aware of, and Sam will, I think, will back me up on this, there is a 6-month rule on attendance at council meetings. Now we have to be careful that if, for example, let's say all meetings are virtual, just as a scenario, and people log in, so the name pops up on the screen that the panel members can see, for example, where all the names are available. But does that actually mean participation and acknowledging their attendance at a meeting? I'm not saying not just this council, but for any local authority where a virtual login doesn't mean attendance. Sam, can you sort of maybe enlighten us if there's anything in the Coronavirus Act on that aspect, on the attendance aspect?
Well, in terms of the regulations as they are now, then yes, it does count if they're logged in, if they're recorded as present in the meeting, then that's counted as attendance towards the 6-month rule. Following the 7th of May, unless the legal challenge is successful, that's not the case anymore. So even if we were to pursue a soft hybrid meeting, and if we had a soft hybrid meeting model, and if we were comfortable with allowing members to contribute to those meetings, virtually, but not be able to vote, and they wouldn't be forming the quorum, and they wouldn't be marked as present in the minutes, and they wouldn't be marked as present they wouldn't be considered present in terms of the 6-month rule. So it wouldn't remove the requirement for members to be present at a physical meeting once every 6 months. I think the other thing you've got to consider is it will be probably quite confusing to the public that you've got a member in attendance virtually, but it doesn't count towards the attendance, and why they're not voting. And if there isn't a quorum at the physical meeting place because everyone's decided to join from home, which I'm sure we'd be able to sort out in a practical basis, but you never know sometimes. It might confuse members of the public as to why isn't this meeting taking place? Everyone's here. I do this sort of thing for my residents association or amenity group. Why can't the council do it for their hybrid meeting? So there's lots of arguments why I think the soft hybrid option is unless we think about it very carefully, might not be a good idea until we've got the actual legislation to allow hybrid meetings to be lawful and to sort of count towards attendance and voting, etc.
I mean, I understand the sort of attendance in terms of the current legislation because that allows, but it's about if we are in person, let's say if this scrutiny panel meeting was in person, we would have a dozen people or so around a table discussing this, and we could physically see that that person has been present and hopefully engaged in a meeting throughout that period. Now, for example, today, and a lot of meetings, and I'm sure every council has this issue, where I can see other councillors, for example, but some councillors I can't see because they've switched their video off. So I'm just putting it out for maybe for discussion, is how do we account for those who are not necessarily visible throughout? Sam?
Just because a councillor's present in a room in a physical meeting doesn't mean they're engaging with the meeting necessarily. I'm just going to put it out there. You know, a previous authority, there was one that came into criticism for doing their shopping for a cruise and a perfume or something during the meeting on their iPad. You know, so and I'm sure that's never happened at Ealing, but you know, I'm just saying, you know, I think it's very difficult to you know, the judgment will be made by the electorate on that, I think, rather than something that we can make a judgment on as officers who are minuting the meeting and as you know, as members who are sitting around the committee table. You know, I'm sure that residents who take an interest in this kind of thing will notice if a member turns up seems to have turned up at all these meetings that they're supposed to have gone to but never contributed, for instance. You know, these things don't go unnoticed by some of the residents in the borough. So I think it's very much a question for the electorate. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you. It might actually make people, make councillors contribute, engage more than they would maybe than in person. Food for thought. Councillor Woodruff.
Well, can I just say, over the years I've, even before this time, I can remember councillors turning up at the beginning of a meeting and then disappearing, and you wonder what they'd gone to, and at least they were able to sign the signing in form and disappeared. That has always happened, to be honest. What my suggestion is, I think, were it legal, if all this were legal, that, for instance, Scrutiny Committee might decide on one of its meetings being in person and all the others being virtual, so that I think there is a view that it would be quite a good idea to councillors to occasionally meet, but have either one or two meetings in a cycle in person, but I would suggest that the majority of them be virtual.
Thank you, Councillor Woodruff. Councillor Shaw.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yeah, in terms of if we were to recommend as a council to write to the Secretary of State, I think we wouldn't like to commit too much down just one direction. You know, again, it just goes with the flexibility that I've been talking about. You know, and as Councillor Woodruff has just quite rightly said, you know, that there could be ways of running it to sort of, rather than saying, oh well, this is what we'd prefer one way or another. I think it'd be great to keep all those options on the table and say, actually, we think that as an authority, we should have all these options to be able to run the meetings, you know, and you need to legislate for it. And make sure that it's possible, and you know, obviously not just for us, but I'm sure, you know, most other authorities in the country would agree and say, actually, yes, let us make the decision on how it's best for us to run our meetings.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Councillor Nagpal.
Thanks, Chair. So, I mean, firstly, I agree with Councillor Shaw that we shouldn't just go down one avenue. We should say that we want all these options, and yeah, let them legislate for it, because I think a variety of options would work. But just going to the point about you know, people switching off their cameras and things, I think it would be good if, you know, we could have some guidelines about, you know, an approach, and everybody has to follow that approach, because what I've seen is that in every virtual meeting, it's done differently. In some meetings, you're told, can everybody switch off their cameras unless they're speaking? So you just think, okay, well, I've got to have my camera off unless I'm going to say something. In other meetings, you know, everyone has their cameras on. In some meetings, some have theirs on and some don't. So I think it would be good to have an approach going forwards if we are going to continue to do these virtual meetings, so that everyone knows, right, you know, you have your camera on throughout the meeting, or you only have your camera on when you're going to speak. The rest of the time you have it off, and it's clear to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sam, can I just confirm that the public see the person who's speaking only? That's
correct, yeah. We've used a couple of different platforms, this and Teams Live Events, but for both of them, yes, they're either switched automatically. So in this meeting, the camera angle switches to the person speaking, and Teams Live Events is controlled manually by somebody who's called the producer, and they select the person speaking, who's speaking at the time. And in Zoom, there is an option for a gallery view for the person who is controlling the meeting, but we haven't used that. We haven't tended to use that because I think you can get a bit out of hand if you've got too many people tuned in with the camera on. We have had issues as well with bandwidth and streaming and things, and it's been a bit of a journey for ourselves. So I take what Councillor Nagpal said and on board, and I think once we settled on the method we're going to use and the platform we're going to use, we will be able to provide that that certainty on what the camera protocol should be, because you know we've been sort of very much experimenting over the last year to try and get it right, and try and get the right platform, and that has necessitated different advice at different times. So apologies for any confusion for members on that, but I think it's something we'll have to clarify once we're settled on an approach going forward, once we've fixed the, you know, sorted the technology out to get it working properly, and you know, everyone's comfortable with it.
Thank you. I think the nitty-gritty of the information of any potential if we're going to be allowed, for example, by Secretary of State, by legislation, if we're allowed to have hybrid or virtual or a mixture of any of the above, I think the detail needs to be left to ICT / the whips and the constitutional review group, I believe, to set the policy. I don't think we'll make that decision this evening. I just wanted to reiterate a few points this evening in terms of potential recommendations. I'll work backwards from what we discussed this evening. I would like to put forward a recommendation from what I've been hearing, is to put forward a recommendation to the Secretary of State to be allowed to have the flexibility to have hybrid / soft virtual / hybrid / soft hybrid and in-person meetings, and write to the Secretary of State to indicate support to be allowed in legislation to have such meetings which are valid, valid as a council meeting, as if they would be in person of old. I'd like to put that recommendation forward. How to get a feel from the panel whether we want to separate council meeting away from other meetings, say scrutiny panel.
I don't know if it's just me, but some of your sound sort of, there was a problem. Maybe it was just me. I don't know, other people. I couldn't hear.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's
okay. Yeah. Okay, so just to reiterate, is that what Sam wanted to mention as well?
No, I was just going to suggest, Chair, that you, rather than writing to the Secretary of State, you responded to the Secretary of State's call for evidence in that way, rather than writing, because I think it would be really helpful if there was representations going from all angles on this, because it will really help build the case for it.
If the panel would allow me, then on that note, would allow me to gather the notes from this evening's meetings, together with the recommendations as a call for evidence with regards to virtual meetings and other versions of meetings, or other configurations of meetings. If the panel are happy to allow me to do that in discussion with the vice chair of the panel. I also want to, there was a recommendation that was raised. Sorry, was that? Did the council want to speak? Sorry. No.
Actually, can I just come in briefly? Sorry, I had my hand up for a while. I do want to stop you midstream, Chair, because we're talking about our meetings, and there are a couple of members of the public still with us. Kate and Libby have been intently watching us. I just wondered if you had a view yourselves about how you, putting aside the purpose for you attending planning meetings, how you might have thought the way forward might be, or how do you think virtual meetings council meetings be useful?
Okay.
Putting you on the spot there slightly, sorry.
Kate wishes or Libby to come in.
Well, I think that they've been very productive. I agree with a lot of what members of the panel have said. I do have a concern about people who do not have access to the technology. Now, that's not to say that those people would necessarily attend meetings anyway, but one is actively excluding them if all that's done is via technology. So I think one would have to think about options. It might be that the main meetings are virtual, but you have a room somewhere in the council offices where people could sit and view the meeting, those who don't have technology, like watching it on TV, you see what I mean? But I am concerned about people who don't have access to the technology.
So thank you for that, Kay. No, that's a very good point in terms of effectively allowing them the experience of being in person without the technology.
Yes, or even giving them the technology in the sense of having somewhere where they can, they go, but they watch in the same way as everybody else is watching, rather than necessarily it being a face-to-face meeting.
Thank you. No, it's a good point. Okay. I'll take everything on board. I would just mention with regards to sort of the virtual accessibility and providing options for the accessibility angle to virtual meetings or hybrid meetings.
I think Libby wanted to speak, didn't
Yeah, just to add to that, I think we're terribly Ealing Central sort of where we are, and it's a huge borough, and it might be worth, with good publicity, to actually have the television, if you like, on in a library or a community centre in different parts of the borough. I mean, it would take some. I think we're not getting out to the people enough, and we didn't really cover that enough this evening. I don't know why, but we're not getting out to the people. It's like people not attending ward meetings. I have views about that. But if we could get people more involved, and we could get them to watch it in maybe the libraries if we've got any left, but the community centres and places in East Acton or in Southall or in Northolt or somewhere like that, and that might be quite good. Could be combined with a more ward meeting. It could, I just think we're missing them. And I went to the Southall Matters meeting. I attended that last night, and this, they're just totally disengaged from the rest of Ealing, and they have also similar problems to we have in Acton, but also other ones. But to bring them in would be really, really good, and you could do it if people got out there enough and talked to them and just do some studies on it. You could do it. You need to do. You need to work on it, but you could get more people to attending both ward forums and some of the council meetings if you worked on it and if they were interested enough. And I think sometimes they're really interesting, but nobody knows about it, and nobody knows that they're going on. And I like the scrutiny meetings, but I keep on forgetting about them because they're not up in front of me. And so they're not there. And it's only if I hear something particular is going on, I remember to come. So it's telling people they're there. An awareness campaign is what you really need. And you could start with doing a pilot awareness campaign in one part of the borough and see how it worked, take the good parts of it and then move it across. And it wouldn't be terribly expensive.
I was about to actually, thank you, Libby. I was about to suggest that maybe one of the recommendations is to be, to do a pilot guinea pig testing in a corner of the borough, which wouldn't normally, probably the distance wise, for example, south or sort of East Acton, for example, where Councillor Taylor's ward is that those who maybe not either having engaged in the past or through distance have not been able to participate in meetings, we could maybe either go via a library, as Libby mentioned, or a local community centre, set up a temporary infrastructure, such as a large screen TV with YouTube facilities, to be able to listen in to those who don't have technology or the technological barrier. Councillor Taylor wanted to come in.
Yeah, I mean, not just because you mentioned East Acton, there's a danger we can be worried about our own ego here slightly. I mean, residents in my part of the ward have got enough meetings, for example, with HS2, Old Oak. There's a lot of things are competing as well. And so I can't speak for other areas necessarily, but
it was just an example. It was just
I appreciate the example, but it occurred to me the likely people who would be interested, you know, their own time is quite limited, I suspect, as well. So, but that's
one of the ideas that came to me whilst I was listening to, for example, Libby Camp and others on the panel, is one that might be of interest to those who don't know about council meetings but may be interested in, for example, the health scrutiny panel, which I think touches upon everybody's lives, rather than, for example, like Councillor Taylor mentioned, HS2, which is a very sort of niche subject in the borough. So certain meetings which has, to loosely put it, wider appeal, can be piloted to be shown in a local venue to those who wouldn't normally be reached out to. So I could put together a recommendation where a pilot can be carried out to air such a meeting in public at a venue. What did the panel feel about that?
Bad idea.
Sam?
I was just going to suggest that you think carefully about this recommendation, just because, well, I mean, the venue doesn't matter, I suppose, but I know the venue was suggested as a library, but I'm not totally sure there's going to be many libraries open at 7 p.m. at night, which is when most of our meetings take place. You know, some of the council meetings don't finish till 9:30, 10 o'clock. But, you know, I'm not saying we limit it to a library. So you might just want to, if you do want to make that kind of recommendation, you know, keep it a bit open so that a creative solution can be found on that. That was all I was going to mention.
It was very much a very wide open sort of pilot. Let's test it out and see. I even gave the idea of health because it can appeal to a wider community rather than a single subject like HS2 or a specific bespoke. It's where attendance might be higher, for example. But a recommendation in terms of let's try it out. And between Democratic Services and the whips, we can maybe set up an example of this pilot and see how it works. And between the councillors, we can come to an agreement, as I said, to pilot it. I also want to highlight what has been suggested earlier in the meeting. Councillor Taylor highlighted about informing the public via social media of upcoming meetings. Now, I appreciate this is particularly social media. I think it's a relatively cost-free recommendation. But on the flip side, if we are going to maintain at the moment around Ealing, is to have, and I understand a good few years ago, it used to have a list of upcoming meetings, I think on the penultimate page, from what I recall. But this is going back a good few years, where there was a summary of what meetings are coming up. Now, I think in those days, it was a monthly newspaper or monthly magazine. Now it's quarterly, I understand. And I think, is it quarterly or was it bi-monthly? Whatever the frequency is, to have that time period in around Ealing for those who don't necessarily are in everyday contact with the council, like for example Ealing Matters, who are in frequent contact and know what's going on, or know where to look at least around Ealing. Whilst it does have its let's say criticisms, it does reach every household, and especially those who do have a technological barrier. At least they're aware that such meeting occurs, and they can reach out either to a local councillor or to the council to find out how to attend these meetings in whichever format we may have. So I'd like to make a recommendation, well, two recommendations, one on the social media aspect, and one to have around Ealing to have those meetings highlighted. Another recommendation, and probably will need some clarity. Councillor Taylor mentioned about stakeholders to be informed about consultations. Could you clarify?
Yeah, no, I think where I was coming from was, it's a difficult one. I think different departments in the council probably have their own list of consultees that might want to consult on various strategies. I think who it was it Kate or was it Libby was talking about something on this? Yeah,
I know David Harvey mentioned it.
Yeah, it's right. Can I talk about it?
Go on, sorry.
Sorry. No, because I mentioned earlier, David Harvey mentioned about being consulted about consultations and issues in their particular area, in his area.
Yeah. Just wondering how granular we go with some of this, you know, given resource levels that there are as well. I think it's yeah, that is difficult. I mean, he's talking about planning, and I know planning is often controversial, but it's just like take a step back. There are different parts of the council involved in consultation, whether it's housing, whether it's leisure services, whether it's adult social care. Adult social care, for example, will often consult with voluntary sector partners. So those stakeholders are kind of already linked in. So there's a danger of getting too granular because that can take up quite a bit of effort as well.
I'm trying to seek here a practical solution or practical recommendation, Councillor Taylor, from your comment, because I see some merit from, well, I see merit in terms of obviously having a dialogue. I'm just trying to extract from your point a practical recommendation, what can be feasibly done.
I think Libby's trying to speak again.
Yeah.
Libby, yes.
I have some sort of background, working background in this and doing awareness things. The consultations are a nightmare, and until you really to find it in the first instance, very hard. 2 years ago, I wrote to somebody, I can't remember who I started writing to have a look at, see a copy of your communication strategy for the borough. And after 4 months of trying, I actually got an email from somebody who said we don't have one. And the reason I asked for that was because I wanted to see consultations were coming up here and there and everywhere. And I feel quite strongly that consultations everybody should see, even the social service ones sometimes are interested. There are other people who are quite interested, but I mean things like traffic, parks, all sorts of things, and you miss them because you don't know where they are, and different departments do them in different ways. And I think there is a need to put all consultations on the same page with some, make them very easy to find, like on the front page of the website saying for ongoing consultations, have your say, see whatever the page is, something like that, something really, really simple. Then all you have to do is load them up and list them. And departments, I don't know, people running each department have a responsibility to send their consultation information to whoever is responsible for loading the web page. But you have to do something, because I was missing consultations I wanted to take part in because that person hadn't bothered to put them on the consultation page, which is why I asked what was the communication strategy. And having different departments doing things in different ways is not really very good. And I've worked for other local councils in the past as a consultant, and it's the only council I've come across that actually doesn't have a proper communication strategy. And that's why different departments go off in different directions. And I think so that's to look at. But yeah, I think you've got to do something about the consultations. I'm with Hitesh on that one. But I think it's very easy to put right.
Okay, I mean, thank you for that. You highlighted the sort of putting consultations on one website page. Now, I'm being mindful here that it is a good recommendation in terms of putting or at least a directory of consultations on a single page, because obviously we don't want to mix estate planning with healthcare or whatever. We don't want to mix, but at least have one landing page with the spectrum of consultations on both live and past. Now, I am minded here, as that is sort of one prong of consultations, I'm also minding on how to reach people who don't stretch to go online. It's about that push and pull conversation, which is what I think what Councillor Taylor was alluding to, is how to reach out to stakeholders with consultation. So it's pushing the consultation from the council to the stakeholders rather than stakeholders trying to get information.
But all the consultations are online anyway. I haven't come across one yet that wasn't online.
No, I appreciate that. No, I appreciate.
I do think you could make more use of the residents' associations and the tenants' groups and things. I mean, we have an up-to-date list on Dealing Matters of the residents, not all the tenants' associations though, and asking them to put out in that they send out emails very easily and very cheaply and very quickly to say up forthcoming consultations on blah blah and blah. See the consultation page and put the link in.
I just want to highlight here that Sam Bailey has just sent us a link. For those watching in the public, Sam Bailey, Head of Democratic Services, has sent a link to the Ealing Council website of the current and past consultations. Currently, for those who cannot see the webpage, there are 4 consultations. One's about the establishing a neighbourhood planning area forum in Central Acton, the consultation of the draft Ealing tenancy strategy, installation of segregated pop-up cycle lanes, and proposed low traffic neighbourhoods, just to give an example. So thank you, Sam, for that. However, so what I think is important, I think what Libby is trying to convey is that it's not obvious from the main page of how to reach the consultations. Because I mean, I personally knew that those consultations are there because we often get informed by internally. However, I think the public needs to know that such page exists. If I may have half a recommendation of basically highlighting the prominence on the main page, if that would be possible. I mean, technologically, I think that's very easy. It's just making sure it's high profile. Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, I can't remember I know a number of different London boroughs seem to have a similar website and the way it's functioning, and I thought what often appears depends on the clickability of different areas and what's popular. But I appreciate the prominence and that you may wish to, but there are a number of competing things we may wish to be prominent about. You know, COVID, for example, the last year has been absolutely vital to have that on, you know, front and centre on the page. People might be interested in planning applications and people and other areas. So, you know, I'm not an expert on how you build websites, so don't get me wrong. I'm not about to suggest that, but, you know, just bear in mind that there will be different competing requirements. You know, parking, you know, people be interested, how do I pay my parking fine or something? So there's a number of competing things that go on the front page, really.
Thank you, Kay. Before I go to Kay and Councillor Shaw, if I just maybe, no, I mean, for example, I'm just looking at the council website. There's a banner, which is a sort of strip on top of the page saying the Greenford Weybridge is out of service. So in terms of, I suppose, accessibility and prominence, it could be a suggestion to have like a rolling newscast there, for example. I totally agree. It has other subjects such as parking or missed wheelie bin collection, which is a high frequency visit. But yes, overall, I think that there seems to be a push to have consultations more visible, possibly on the main page. Kay wanted to come in.
Yeah, this is probably too long for now, but I do think there is a much bigger issue about the website. The website is really designed around council services, and that, you know, the structure, if you look at the headings at the top of the page, they're primarily about council services. Everything else has to be searched for. Very often you don't find the right search term. I think there's a need to keep council services, obviously, because, as I said earlier, that's how I got into the website, is reading information on services. So that's fine. But I think there needs to be a higher level structure which allows you, which you will populate with other areas like planning, for example. So you'd have an area for planning, you'd have an area for, I don't know, health, housing. I don't know what those headings would be. You'd have to work them out. But at the moment, I think, you know, the website is like a labyrinth.
If I may, I mean, whilst I love websites personally, I think websites and the structure of it, I think it might be a subject for a future scrutiny meeting for the strategy. Otherwise, we'll be going down a rabbit hole with that.
I agree. Thank you.
I mean, no, it's a good point, and I think you know, these conversations, the dialogue in such meetings, lends for future discussion. So
yeah,
if Harjeet, as part of the minutes, can sort of note that for future discussion, I think it's valid. If I may, I just want to reiterate this recommendation. It's other than sort of online prominence of consultations. I'm going back to Councillor Taylor, if I may, to just, if anybody else has a comment on this, how do we practically seek resolution to enable consistent and wide or far-reaching stakeholders in relevant consultations? We might not have the answer this evening. Councillor Shaw has his hand up. Do you want to discuss on this subject?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, sorry, just getting my video started. Yes, just in terms of consultations, I mean, of course, every authority, it's one of the challenges of getting, you know, sort of more and better responses from council consultations. I mean, you know, typically, if the council launches any consultation and gets, you know, above 20%, then that's quite a high response rate in terms of consultations. You know, because people either don't see it or don't know about it. You know, of course, we want the public to know about us as much as possible. But I was also just wondering about different types of consultations that the council runs. Just thinking about what Libby and Kay are saying, that there are some, obviously, you know, all public consultations, of course, should be very prominent on the website. but the council will also have a duty to run other consultations with different groups legally. It won't be a public consultation, or may not be a public consultation. So I think there's a bit of crossover here about the consultations that are being run by the council and where they're best placed for the audience. You know, well, what is the audience that's going to respond to them? You know, of course, you know, the public would always be able to have their say on every sort of major issue and every consultation. That's what we want. We are a democracy after all. But sometimes some of the more technical ones might be going to the stakeholders. It might be, for example, in healthcare, it might be in sort of adult social services or something. It might be looking at care homes and things like that. And also gathering people's responses, individual responses. So it's about catering to the audience and maximising where the council can get the best response from.
Councillor Shaw, sorry, if I may just jump here, because I don't want to necessarily waste your contribution. I'm aware that the next municipal year will have a scrutiny panel about reviewing resident engagement. And I think we've sort of gone away from sort of the council meeting side to the engagement with residents, such as consultations. So
yes.
For the sake of the minutes and what has been already contributed, I think that can be sort of passed on for future, well, in the next 12 months.
Absolutely.
Consultations as a subject.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea. Yeah.
So I don't think we should. I appreciate it's gone 9 o'clock, and I don't necessarily want to reiterate the consultation aspect. If I may, there's other potential recommendations. Is if this was mentioned by Kay from Ealing Matters earlier on with regards to council meetings, is how to engage with this might sort of mix with the resident engagement, and I think it'll overlap both this meeting and the next sort of panel on resident engagement, is to how to engage with the public prior to meetings or meeting subjects occurring. And I think whilst we could somehow put a recommendation forward at this stage, I think it's best lent to the resident engagement side. That would be prior to council meetings occurring. And I wouldn't want to necessarily restrict the next panel's scope. Because hopefully if there's a recommendation from that panel, it will feed into any future council meeting. So I'm just double checking any other recommendations, but I only have the 3 recommendations, which are the submit a letter or the call to evidence with regards to the virtual stroke hybrid meetings, the informing of council meetings via around Ealing and on social media. Are there any other recommendations that the panel would like to raise that I've missed or maybe precise enough about?
I just wanted to go back to something Kay said right at the beginning, and I think it's been great having Kay and Libby on tonight, because your evidence you've given is very powerful. It's given me a lot of things to think about as the head of service in this area. I'm sure it's given the panel a lot to think about, but I think one of the things that you mentioned, Kay, as one of your sort of recommendations, which I thought was really helpful, because I think as members and as officers, we do often forget that members of the public don't do this day in, day out, week in, week out, and there are lots of members of the public that sometimes when they watch a meeting, it's the first time they've ever engaged with a council meeting, and certainly as with the virtual meetings, with them being more accessible, there's probably even more people out there that are in that position as well. So I think, you know, whether the panel wants to make a recommendation about it or not, I will certainly be taking the recommendation you made, Kay, around having a bit more explanation and narrative from the chair during the meeting to explain exactly what's going to happen, how the meeting is going to proceed. I think it would be very helpful for all involved in that respect. You know, speaking from a personal position, you know, I always try to make sure that speakers are properly briefed, particularly if they're public speakers, and I speak to them beforehand to make sure they're comfortable with doing that. But you know, I'm happy to remind my team to do that. I think it's difficult, more difficult with planning than anything else because of how busy it is and how many different things have to be done before the meeting. But I certainly think that we could probably try a bit harder on that, and I accept that as something I could definitely take back. Again, whether the panel wants to make a recommendation on that or not, it's something for myself to take on and think about as head of service for the area.
Thank you, Sam. I have to admit, put my hand up, Kay and Libby, that I'm guilty of this meeting, that I should have put more structure in terms of at the beginning of the meeting, and I'm guilty of that. So apologies for that. Hopefully, it's a one-off, and hopefully I will improve in the future. But yeah.
Meeting.
Sorry?
It's a different kind of meeting from planning meetings, that's for sure.
Yes. No, but it's a good point where, as Sam said, we do this day in, day out. And I think, I mean, I've been in council 15 years and it feels like everyone should know. We take it for granted, maybe. Not necessarily we take public for granted. I think we take knowledge for granted more than anything. So we are aware that the public are listening, whether in this case virtually or in a chamber or in a meeting, or for future discussion through, you know, from the minutes, or even any high profile subject. So no, I'm guilty, and I think it's a lesson for myself and everybody else. And I think we should improve our practice to be more structured, I think, in presenting a meeting to the public. Councillor Burke has a hand up.
A couple of points, hopefully quick. The first one is actually really that kind of recommendation wouldn't go amiss for new councillors. As someone who's a first go rounder, you don't get a lot of input actually yourself, how it works and how to do it. So I don't think it's just about the public, frankly. And then secondly, this is a crossover with the report, but I think, I can't remember, Kay, if it was you or Libby who mentioned about the public and speaking at planning meetings. And one of the things that came up at the last meeting was about, within the rules, which are quite fixed, are we maximising the amount of time that public can speak at it? And I don't think we got an answer to it. I know it was going to be a recommendation for the officers to come back to us, but I know you both alluded to that about the time that people have to speak at planning meetings. So I think we agreed it would be included in the recommendations anyway, but I think it crosses over between this meeting and the last one.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Burke. With regard to members of the public or maybe officers who are providing evidence, expert witness to a meeting like this evening, I don't necessarily, I mean, I'm not mentioning planning here, but for the purpose of non-planning meetings, I think the chair, whoever the chair is, has to find a balance between having enough speakers of a wide spectrum, and not being here until midnight as well. So I think whilst I totally agree with Councillor Burke in terms of allowing or opening up the question of how much time, I think it's something that should be left to a chair of that particular meeting to determine the best. I mean, personally, I feel I'm quite generous in terms of allowing the public to speak, because effectively the scrutiny panel should be for the public to input in. So it's a shame that other speakers have not arrived this evening.
But I think that's the problem, because like some people might want to be inclusive and some people might not. And what we're trying to get to is a point where everybody's inclusive, not just those that are naturally inclined to be inclusive. My hunch would be the problem is with the people who aren't inclusive. So if you don't mind me disagreeing, Joanna, I think actually we should have a little bit more guidance around it so that the public feel it's transparent and open and fair.
So on the back of that, before I come to you, Kay, if I may, just to put meat on the bone of what Councillor Burke just said there, could you maybe word a recommendation?
I think it's the wording would be that as a council, we should aspire to best practice and maximising the contribution that members of public can make. And we should aim to deliver that. So rather than being average or little in the amount that we allow people to make, we look around and see what's the best practice in this and how much we can give across all of these inclusive events.
So encourage.
More than encourage.
Yeah, more than encourage. Okay.
Try to do it.
I will find some superlatives in that recommendation. Thank you. Kay.
No, I was just going to make the point that when I was thinking about what I was going to say, I think there are two different kinds of situations. Planning meetings, you've got loads of people, objectors wanting to speak. And therefore, you know, you could be there all night having people speaking and probably saying much the same thing. So it's different from a meeting like this, where you are calling, you are inviting people to speak, to give their views on different aspects of an issue. I do think they're slightly different situations, if you see what I mean. Certainly that's how I felt when I was writing my piece. Yeah. They're slightly different.
With regards to planning, without the chair of planning here or the vice chair of planning and any officer from planning, I don't necessarily want to tread on their toes too much in that respect. However, it could be a recommendation to take away for the time given to objectors or to speakers, both sides, to be potentially given more time. But I'll leave that recommendation to be passed on for review if the panel feel that's one to submit.
Thank you.
If I may just write that down. Okay, planning.
I have to go.
Okay. Is Councillor Burke, is that an old hand? Okay. Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with Councillor Burke what she said. I think that's fine. I think we're also need to be mindful that the fact we are elected members, and you know, it is our job to kind of weigh up any information and whatever committee it is, not just planning, and to have the conversation amongst us as councillors as well in an open forum to deliberate. I know because I sort of opened the door for Kay and Libby to come in that sense. And in other scrutiny panels, sometimes they have co-optees as well, don't they? Mm-hmm. But ultimately, we are there as councillors and we've got to have our deliberations and to make that decision ourselves. Otherwise, not necessarily planning, and I'm sure Kay wasn't necessarily referring to planning in this sense, we don't want to have interjections all the time.
No, I agree. I'm quite flexible when it's scrutiny because I think it allows, we need that debate to evolve and to formulate ideas. But I agree, Councillor Taylor, that in certain meetings you want some, I think, more structure to the conversation. I suppose these agile scrutiny meetings, the nature of it is to have that dialogue rather than a set piece of an agenda that every meeting has. I think it's I suppose the pros and cons of having an agile meeting where the discussion flows. So no, I totally take your point, and I take Kay's point as well. Okay. If I may, is there any other recommendations that that panel members would like to raise. I can see Councillor Shaw's hand.
Yes, thanks, Chair. If I could just come in, just thinking about planning particularly, and I'm going to do this perhaps knowingly to stir up a honeypot, perhaps. But in planning, I've objected as a ward councillor to things, and there is a discrepancy. There's a discrepancy between what the amount of time the public have and the amount of time that the councillor has to object. And so perhaps, what I might suggest is that councillors should be able to get their objection across more efficiently and more quickly. Then, so perhaps you could play it the other way and reduce time that councillors have to object and allow the public more time to be able to object. And that's real sort of resident engagement and allowing them to have their say. Where the councillor will generally be supporting what the resident is saying anyway, and then let the councillor back that up, or if there is that objection. I know that I'm being quite controversial here and perhaps playing a bit of devil's advocate, but it might be an interesting way of looking at things.
I do like devil's advocate. Thank you, Councillor Shaw. I do like that. Because as I mentioned earlier, with regards to planning, the recommendation will be more that the time allocated for various speakers to be reviewed by the planning chair, and potentially, and I think Sam, if you can correct me, the Constitutional Review Group who would possibly review the time spent. Is that correct?
The public speaking procedures for planning are a protocol. They're not actually part of the Constitution. So it would very much be the planning chair and vice chair and the planning officers to have a look into this. I think, and you probably heard this the last meeting, so I'm not going to do it in great detail, but the particular issue you have with speaking at planning committee is that it is a quasi-judicial meeting, what that means is that it is essentially acting as a court of law, and the principles of natural justice have to apply, and there are rights of people on both sides that are being weighed up by councillors here in these meetings, and it would be we have to be very careful to be able to provide a fair hearing and give give time to both sides to put their objections across, and I do recognise that often in the very controversial planning decisions we have to take, there is a large weight of resident opinion in one direction, but at the same time you've also got to weigh up the other sides, and just because they're not present there doesn't mean that they're not that doesn't have to be considered as part of the meeting. So that doesn't necessarily, I know that's not going to make me popular with a lot of residents that want to speak and extra speakers and things, but I just wanted to be really clear on where the issues are here, because we need to be careful that we're giving everyone who turns up at these meetings a fair hearing. I mean, one example I'll give from my own experience at Ealing was the Durston House application. I don't know if anyone in the meeting was there for that. It was about a year and a half ago, and it was very, very contentious. There was a lot of strength there was a lot of opposition locally to it, but there's also a lot of support, and you didn't actually realise the support for the application, because the beginning of the meeting there was a lot of heckling and shouting and things on the objectors. Yet when the application passed, what I didn't realise till afterwards to explain to me was there was a lot of sports clubs and things that had been promised use of these new facilities at this application, and they kind of let up an almighty cheer when it was approved. That's one example. I'm not saying that's typical, but it just kind of illustrates the point that there are winners and losers in every planning decision, and we have to be very careful that we're balancing the rights of both sides, and having a fair hearing. I don't think there's anything wrong with asking that we reconsider the protocols, and I think it's something for the chair and vice chair and the officers to do so. But we just need to be realistic. It's what we're trying to achieve here, and we just need to be very careful. We're not setting ourselves up for challenge later on down the line and we also need to be careful not to raise people's expectations. That we can necessarily do that.
Thank you, Sam.
Just a note of caution more than anything.
No, I understand. No, in the recommendation, I'm just noting down. It would have been equal time for speakers, for the different speakers, or a review time for all the speakers, such as what Councillor Shaw mentioned about the councillor, the ward councillor. So, in terms of the objectors and the supporters or the applicant, I will leave that to the chair of planning and the officers to review the whole package, but in order for it to be equal in terms of for both supporters and objectors. I don't want to preempt that review, but in order to instigate that review by them. So the recommendation is to instigate review of that protocol. Thank you, Libya. I understand that you have to leave the meeting. Thank you. Councillor Woodruff, final speaker.
Well, I just wanted to, just following on that, I mean, I think we ought to keep away from planning, but I think the point is, if there is a lot of local opposition at the moment, the developer and the residents would have equal say. The fact that you've got a councillor actually being able to have a certain amount of extra thing is quite useful for the residents. The residents therefore do get an extra amount of time, which I think can be quite useful. The thought that councillors should speak efficiently and cogently is unbelievable. That anybody should, that any councillor should. You'll be saying they shouldn't be more interested in their own speaking than anything else. But
yeah, take that point, Councillor Woodruff. Yep.
Thank you. If I may tie up this agenda item, I will reiterate the recommendations that I have in my notes. Okay, so what were we just discussing in terms of recommendation? So to request or instigate a review of the planning of the protocol with regards to speaking at planning committee for the relevant officers and chair of planning and vice chair of planning to review all speakers. Also, recommendation is to provide structure of meetings for both the public and for new councillors. Also, a recommendation with regards to aspire, maximise, encourage best practice for the public to contribute to public meetings, such as, for example, this evening's scrutiny panel. I think, recommendation to find a way forward to encourage people to speak, the public to speak at council meetings. Also, recommendation to inform the public via social media of forthcoming meetings. Also, recommendation to have a list of forthcoming meetings in around Ealing, relevant to the frequency of around Ealing. So if there's 2 months, it's 2 months ahead. Say, for example, on the penultimate page or the back page of around Ealing. Also, a final recommendation with regards to submit a call to evidence with regards to having virtual stroke, hybrid stroke, in-person meetings with regards to the Secretary of State's call to evidence. Are the panel members satisfied with those recommendations? I don't hear any objectors.
That's fine. That's fine. Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Woodruff. Okay, if we may move on to the last item, If I just make, sorry, apologies. I suppose the wonders of virtual meetings that you have virtual meeting notes. Apologies, my council laptop. And the panel's draft final reports. Final report. Does anybody have any comments? Councillor Woodruff, is that an old hand? Councillor Burke.
There were just a couple of bits. I can email them after, but I just thought a few of the things were not entirely clear in terms of like just some of the things about, like the thing we've mentioned today about how we're reviewing who speaks at what and how long for, about the design review panels, etc. I just wasn't quite entirely sure sometimes what the actual action was that we were expecting.
Which page is this?
Sorry, I'm trying to do the flicking thing. Would it be? Do we need to do? I mean, it's not disagreeing with the spirit of it. It was just I'm happy to email. I'm conscious it's 9:30, so I'm happy to drop a quick email afterwards to say, because the spirit was there, but it was just. But what you've said tonight, are we asking them to review it, or are we saying
no? This is a draft report for the purpose of it being draft, that panel members can see if there are any changes or wording changes. But as you say, not the spirit of it, but it makes sure the accuracy of it. So I appreciate it's now 9:30. So in terms of any maybe semantics or wording, I'm happy to discuss it outside of this meeting. But if anybody on this panel has any issues or any accuracy issues with regards to the draft report, I would like to hear from any panel member this evening. I note nobody has an issue. As I said, if there's any wording that for better clarity or to that the report didn't capture from a previous meeting, I'm happy to take outside of the meeting. Councillor Woodruff.
So just to make clear, so this is the last meeting of this scrutiny panel, isn't it? So
that's correct.
So if somebody has, then we won't be able to do it at another meeting. And the recommendations you've just said, presumably you will distribute, and if anybody's got some strong problems about it, then they'll send it to you, won't they? And well, you know, I think that's...
Yes, I mean, that's why I reiterated the recommendations this evening.
Just so that everybody's clear that there won't be another meeting. This is the last meeting.
Yes, yeah, this is the last meeting of this, how can I put it, a pilot Agile panel. It was an experiment to see how separate topics can evolve and be discussed. And I think, I'm not sure if anybody else agrees, to some degree they've been successful to discuss subjects which may have not found the natural home in these sort of scheduled scrutiny panels. If anybody has any views on such an Agile panel. Councillor Woodruff?
Well, no, but I'll just get in now. I'd just sort of like to thank you for your chairing of the year. I think, unlike your predecessor, you've managed to last the whole year. But yeah, you've done very well, and thank you for all your chairing, which I think has been very good. Well done.
Thank you, Simon, for being my vice. But also, I'd like to thank Harjeet for being a fantastic meeting clerk and patient for all those hours we have spent discussing these meetings. And Sandra for facilitating the virtual meeting, and also all the panel members this evening. I'd like to thank you for your contributions and on the past guest speakers throughout the year. I understand Councillor Shaw wants to have a final word.
Yes, I'll just echo Councillor Woodruff's thanks and your thanks, Chair, to the council officers who, as always, have done a very good job. In response to you, how the Agile meeting has gone, I think the fact that actually we've discussed today something that is very important, which is the virtual meetings and how that's carrying on. Or not, that is something that wouldn't have fitted into another panel, and so I just think it's worth saying on the record that it is worth having the ability to respond, in scrutiny to these matters as they turn up. So I do think that that's worthwhile.
Thank you very much, Councillor Shaw. Thank you very much. And I appreciate it's late. I'd just like to thank you, everybody. And also Sam for heading up Democratic Services and supporting virtual meetings and this Agile panel. So I appreciate it's late, 20 to 10. Thank you very much and have a good evening.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.